The Galactic Research Institute's central chamber buzzed with an unusual energy as chief researcher Val Theri adjusted her sensory membranes. Her crystalline form sparkled under the soft bioluminescent lighting as she prepared to deliver what might be the most controversial presentation of her 300-cycle career. "Esteemed colleagues," she began, her voice resonating through the chamber's perfect acoustics, "our recent first contact with the species known as humans has revealed an anomaly that challenges everything we understand about evolutionary survival patterns." The assembled researchers, representing dozens of species from across the galaxy, shifted in their various forms of seating. Some floated in suspension tanks, others perched on gravity-adjusted platforms, but all focused intently on the holographic display materializing in the chamber center. "As you can see," Val Theri continued, manipulating the display to show a detailed human anatomical scan, "these beings have achieved spacefaring capability despite possessing no natural defensive adaptations. No scales, no exoskeleton, no energy fields, not even basic radiation resistance. Their outer covering is a mere few millimeters thick." A ripple of disbelief passed through the audience. Senior researcher's Tex, his insectoid features expressing clear skepticism, raised a primary appendage. "Surely this is impossible. How do they survive basic environmental hazards?" "That," Val Theri replied, her crystalline structure pulsing with excitement, "is precisely what makes them remarkable. Consider this footage." The hologram shifted to show a human construction site. The assembled scientists watched in horror as a worker accidentally stepped onto an unsecured platform, plummeting 3 stories before landing on a pile of safety netting and debris. To their absolute shock, the humans stood up, brushed themselves off, and shouted something about taking lunch early. "This is not an isolated incident," Val Theri continued over the murmurs of disbelief. "Humans regularly survive what we would consider fatal trauma. Their bodies possess an unprecedented ability to repair themselves from injuries that would terminate any other known species." She cycled through more examples. Humans surviving extreme temperature variations, exposure to toxic substances, massive physical trauma, and even partial organ loss. Their medical records indicate that they can continue functioning with portions of their vital organs removed or damaged. They can lose up to 40% of their blood volume and recover. Their skeletal structure can break and heal multiple times. "But how?" demanded Dr. Ixtal, his gelatinous form rippling with agitation. "What evolutionary pressure could possibly result in such adaptation?" "That's the fascinating part," Val Theri replied. "It appears to be their default state. They evolved on a death world with such varied and constant threats that instead of developing specific defenses, they develop general survivability. Their bodies are in a constant state of repair and adaptation." She brought up new data streams showing human cellular structure. "Their repair mechanisms are unlike anything we've seen. Rather than preventing damage, they've optimized for recovering from it. It's as if their entire evolutionary strategy was simply to become too stubborn to die." The chamber erupted in scientific debate. Some researchers argued it was impossible, others demanded immediate study protocols. Val Theri waited for the commotion to settle before delivering her final point. But perhaps most remarkably, they seem entirely unaware of how extraordinary this is. To them, this is simply normal. They view their frequent injuries and recoveries as minor inconveniences rather than the biological marvels they represent. She gestured to a final hologram showing the human athlete competing mere months after a complete leg reconstruction. "I propose we establish a dedicated research initiative to study human resilience. Understanding their unique adaptations could revolutionize our approach to survival mechanics across all species." As the chamber filled with excited discussion and rapid-fire questions, Val Theri added one final observation. Perhaps we should be careful about how we conduct our tests. The last research team that attempted to study human pain thresholds had to be evacuated when their subject, rather than withdrawing from the stimulus as expected, became what they termed competitive about it. The assembled scientists laughed, assuming she was making a joke to lighten the mood. Valtheri didn't correct them. They would learn soon enough that when it came to humans, the improbable was merely Tuesday. Would you like me to continue with Part 2? Research Station 7's testing chamber had been specially reinforced for the human trials, though Chief Researcher Valtheri was beginning to suspect even their upgraded facilities might prove inadequate. She watched through the observation window as their human subject, Sarah Chen, casually stretched before the day's tests, as if preparing for a light workout rather than potentially lethal experiments. Subject Chen, Valtheri spoke into the communication system, her crystalline form flickering with concern. Please remember that you can terminate any test at the first sign of discomfort. Oh sure, no problem, Sarah replied cheerfully, bouncing on her toes. But fair warning, my discomfort threshold is pretty high. Last year, I finished a marathon with a broken toe because I'd already paid the registration fee. Valtheri's assistants exchanged worried glances. They'd learned to dread these casual human anecdotes. They usually preceded something that would require extensive revisions to their safety protocols. Let's begin with basic environmental resistance testing, Valtheri announced, trying to maintain scientific detachment. We'll start with temperature extremes within safe. Is that your cryo chamber? Sarah interrupted, pointing at the testing pod. Cool. I've always wondered what it feels like to be a popsicle. Before anyone could stop her, she had already climbed into the chamber. The monitoring equipment immediately began screaming alerts as the temperature plummeted. Valtheri's crystalline structure nearly shattered from stress as she watched the human's core temperature drop to levels that should have triggered immediate cellular death. Instead, Sarah just hugged herself and shouted through chattering teeth, "Hey, this reminds me of winter swimming back home." Though the lake never got quite this civvy. Winter swimming, one of the assistants asked weakly. Oh yeah, great for the circulation. Though that might have been the hypothermia talking. Sarah grinned, her lips now distinctly blue. Speaking of which, anyone else seeing penguins? No? Just me then. They hurriedly extracted her from the cryo chamber, only to watch in amazement as her body temperature normalized within minutes. Before the medical team could even begin their examination, she was already asking about the hot box she'd spotted in the corner. Perhaps we should move on to impact resistance testing, Valtheri suggested desperately, hoping to avoid any more impromptu experiments. The impact testing proved even more disturbing. Sarah approached each trial with enthusiasm that bordered on concerning, treating potentially bone-crushing forces as if they were an amusing diversion. You know, she commented while the machine calculated force vectors, this reminds me of that time I fell off a cliff while hiking. Bounced right off 3 different ledges on the way down. Sure, I broke 6 bones, but I still crawled 2 miles back to my car. You? Crawled? Valtheri's assistant Zext asked, his compound eyes growing impossibly wider. Well yeah, the car wasn't going to drive itself, Sarah shrugged. Though I'll admit, working the pedals with a broken leg was tricky. Had to kind of bounce my foot off the dashboard. The final test of the day involved exposure to various environmental hazards. Sarah's casual attitude toward corrosive substances led to an entirely new section in the research station's safety manual. Fascinating, she remarked, examining her slightly smoking arm where the acid had splashed. This tingles way less than that time I accidentally mixed bleach and ammonia while cleaning my bathroom. Now that was spicy air. You survived direct exposure to chloramine gas, Valtheri asked faintly. Is that what that was? Huh. I just opened all the windows and finished cleaning with a bandana over my face. Had a weird cough for a week though. By day's end, Valtheri had to completely revise her understanding of survivability thresholds. The human had endured conditions that should have been fatal several times over, treating each near-death experience as if it were a mild inconvenience. Excellent work today, Valtheri told Sarah, trying to hide her amazement as the human casually iced a bruise that would have killed most species. Though I must ask, How do you overcome the pain from these tests? Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. Pain's just weakness leaving the body. She quoted what seemed to be some sort of human wisdom. Besides, compared to giving birth, this is nothing. Did I ever tell you about my 36-hour labor? Now that was uncomfortable. Still finished my thesis defense the next day, though. Valtteri made a mental note to completely reconceptualize their pain scale metrics, and perhaps to invest in stronger containment fields, and definitely to never, ever ask about human reproduction. Same time tomorrow. Sarah asked brightly, already heading for the door. I've got some great ideas for the gravity chamber tests. Did you know humans can survive up to 46 Gs for a few seconds? We should totally try that. Valtteri watched her leave, then turned to her team. Update the emergency protocols, she ordered. And someone please explain to me how a species with no natural armor has somehow evolved to treat death as more of a suggestion than a biological inevitability. No one had an answer, but they all knew tomorrow would bring more impossible human survival stories, and probably several more violations of what they had previously considered immutable laws of biology. The Galactic Research Institute's Psychological Assessment Chamber had never seen such unusual readings. Chief Researcher Valtteri and her team watched in fascination as Sarah Chen tackled their most advanced problem-solving scenarios, though not exactly as intended. Fascinating, murmured Dr. Anxful, the station's lead psychologist, his tentacles rippling with excitement. She's completely ignored the standard solution pathway and instead created a makeshift lever out of the testing components to bypass the gravity lock. Valtteri finished, her crystalline form pulsing with a mix of amazement and concern. A solution that technically shouldn't be possible given the material's structural limitations. Through the observation window, Sarah was cheerfully dismantling their supposedly unbreakable puzzle cube, whistling what she called an earworm. Though Valtteri had confirmed humans didn't actually have sonic parasites in their auditory systems. Subject Chen, Dr. Anxful spoke into the comm. That testing unit wasn't meant to be disassembled. Oh, sorry. Sarah looked up, holding what remained of the quantum-locked puzzle. Force of habit. My old engineering professor used to say if you can't solve it, take it apart and make it solve itself, though usually with more colorful language. The researchers watched as she reassembled the device in a configuration that somehow improved its efficiency by 40%. The device's AI seemed equally confused and impressed. But how did you know that would work? Valtteri asked, genuinely curious. The quantum mechanics involved shouldn't be comprehensible without at least 3 decades of specialized study. Sarah shrugged. Reminded me of my toaster. It was doing something similar before it exploded last month, though this has fewer scorch marks. She paused thoughtfully. So far, anyway. The next test involved stress response and decision-making under pressure. They sealed Sarah in a chamber slowly filling with harmless but opaque gas, providing her with various tools to solve her way out. Starting countdown, Dr. Anxful announced. Remember, Subject Chen, this is just a simulation. If you feel overwhelmed, done. Sarah's voice came through the comm before he could finish the safety briefing. The researchers stared at their monitors in disbelief. She'd not only escaped, but had somehow improved the chamber's ventilation system in the process. That was fun. Sarah emerged, covered in lubricant from the air vents. Reminded me of that time I got stuck in an elevator during a power outage. Did you know you can use a broken phone and some chewing gum to short-circuit a safety lock? Though maybe don't put that in the official report. Pretty sure that was technically illegal. Valtteri made a note to review their facility's security measures. Again, the psychological resilience tests proved even more baffling. Sarah's response to simulated no-win scenarios was to consistently refuse to acknowledge them as no-win. The point of the Kobayashi Protocol is to accept that some situations are unwinnable, Dr. Anxful explained patiently after her 15th attempt to hack the simulation. Yeah, but have you tried winning anyway? Sarah responded, already elbow-deep in the simulation's control panel. Besides, anything's possible with enough caffeine and spite. Spite isn't a scientifically recognized motivation factor, one of the junior researchers protested. Then you've clearly never seen a human run on spite and instant noodles through a 3-day coding marathon, Sarah replied, as the simulation suddenly displayed a victory screen that shouldn't have been possible. The final test of the day was designed to measure emotional endurance. They placed Sarah in a simulation of complete isolation, expecting to study the effects of solitude on human psychology. Instead, she spent the time teaching herself to juggle using some spare parts she'd somehow smuggled in, composing what she called a definitely not legally actionable parody song about the research station's cafeteria food, and calculating pi to 1,000 digits out of sheer boredom. Humans, Valtheri noted in her research log that evening, appear to have evolved beyond mere physical resilience into a state of psychological adaptability that borders on reality manipulation. When faced with impossible situations, they simply refuse to accept the impossibility. She watched through the cameras as Sarah headed to the station's gym, apparently unfazed by the day's mental challenges. Oh hey, Sarah stuck her head back into the lab. For tomorrow's tests, mind if I bring my coffee maker? The one in the break room keeps giving me weird looks since I reprogrammed it to make espresso. Pretty sure it's plotting revenge. Valtheri made another note. Further study needed on human relationship with caffeinated beverages. Possible connection to their apparent immunity to normal laws of probability and physics. As Sarah left, humming another earworm, Dr. Anxwell turned to Valtheri. Should we be concerned that she's displaying signs of having already psychologically mapped our entire facility, including several classified areas we never showed her? Add it to the list, Valtheri sighed. Right after figuring out how she's been accessing our sealed archives using nothing but paperclips and what she calls vibes. The research station's AI chose that moment to start playing something called Never Gonna Give You Up through all speakers. Sarah's distant laughter echoed through the corridors. And schedule another security upgrade, Valtheri added wearily. Though at this point, I'm not sure it matters. Humans don't just overcome obstacles. They befriend them, redesign them, or simply convince reality that the obstacles never existed in the first place. The alarms throughout Research Station 7 screamed with an urgency that made Valtheri's crystalline structure vibrate uncomfortably. A catastrophic failure in the station's quantum core had triggered an automatic lockdown, trapping hundreds of researchers in potentially lethal conditions. Status report, she demanded, her form flickering anxiously as she processed multiple emergency feeds. Core containment failing. The station's AI reported clinically. Quantum cascade imminent. Standard evacuation protocols offline. Estimated survival probability 2.3%. Around her, researchers of various species were either frozen in panic or frantically attempting to access emergency systems. The station's supposedly fail-safe designs were proving catastrophically inadequate against a cascading quantum failure. Has anyone seen Sarah? Valtheri suddenly asked, realizing their human subject was conspicuously absent from the chaos. A loud bang from inside the ventilation system answered her question, followed by Sarah's voice echoing through the ducts. A quick question. Is the quantum core supposed to be making a noise like angry pop rocks? Subject Chen, evacuate immediately. Valtheri ordered. The core is. Yeah, about to go quantum critical. I got that part. Sarah interrupted, her voice now coming from somewhere near the primary coolant systems. But has anyone tried turning it off and on again? The quantum core cannot simply be. Valtheri began, before a series of crashes, and what sounded suspiciously like creative human profanity interrupted her. Okay, good news and bad news. Sarah's voice crackled through a commandeered emergency channel. Good news. I've figured out how to prevent the quantum cascade. Bad news. It's going to involve breaking several laws of physics and probably voiding every warranty in the known galaxy. Before anyone could protest, The station's lights flickered as Sarah apparently began her unauthorized repairs. The emergency displays showed impossible readings as she somehow rerouted power through systems that shouldn't have been compatible. Subject Chen. Dr. Angstvol's tentacles were practically tied in knots with anxiety. What you're attempting violates at least 16 fundamental laws of quantum mechanics. Look, Sarah's voice was slightly strained, possibly from hanging upside down in a radioactive chamber. Physics is more like guidelines anyway. Besides, I once fixed a quantum transmission with duct tape and a paperclip. This is basically the same thing, just with more potential for creating a temporary black hole. AWA. The collective shriek of the research team was impressive in its multi-species harmony. Don't worry, it'll be a really small one. Probably. Anyone got any coffee? This might take a minute. The next 20 minutes were simultaneously the longest and shortest of Valtteri's extensive life. They watched in horror and fascination as Sarah essentially wrestled their failing quantum core into submission through a combination of improvised engineering, what she called percussive maintenance, and solutions that made their most advanced physicists need to lie down. There, Sarah finally emerged from the core chamber, covered in coolant fluid and grinning triumphantly. Crisis averted, though you might want to update your quantum physics textbooks. Pretty sure I just proved like half of them wrong. The research team stared at their readings in disbelief. The core was not only stable but somehow operating at 120% efficiency. Several fundamental constants in the local area seemed to have taken personal offense to this and were sulking in the corner of their measurement devices. But how? Valtteri finally managed to ask. Sarah shrugged, attempting to wipe quantum residue off her face, but mostly just spreading it around. Simple, really. The core was oscillating in a way that reminded me of my old washing machine right before it achieved sentience. So I just applied the same fix. A bit of creative rewiring, some precise percussive adjustments, and a complete disregard for what should and shouldn't be possible. She paused, looking thoughtful. Though we might want to evacuate the lower levels for a few hours, I had to temporarily convert some of the break room into exotic matter to make it work. The coffee machine is probably fine, but it might start dispensing drinks from parallel universes for a while. As the emergency teams began their assessment, and several physicists started drafting papers that would revolutionize their understanding of quantum mechanics, Valtteri made her most important research note yet. Humans don't just survive crises, they adapt to and overcome them through methods that shouldn't be possible. Their greatest strength may not be their physical resilience or even their psychological adaptability, but their fundamental inability to accept the word impossible as anything other than a personal challenge. She watched as Sarah headed off to check on the potentially interdimensional coffee machine, humming cheerfully. Though perhaps, Valtteri added to her notes, we should consider revising our definition of impossible entirely. After all, a species that treats quantum physics as a polite suggestion rather than a law clearly operates on a different level of reality than the rest of us. The Galactic Council's Grand Chamber was packed to capacity, with representatives from every spacefaring civilization gathered to hear the findings from Research Station 7. Valtteri stood before them, her crystalline form projecting calm despite the magnitude of what she was about to present. Distinguished representatives, she began, our extensive study of human resilience has led us to a revolutionary conclusion. We have been approaching survival completely wrong for the past million cycles. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Valtteri continued, bringing up holographic data from their research. We assumed that survival required impenetrable defenses, scales, armor, energy shields. We believe that to thrive, a species must prevent damage at all costs. The humans have proven this assumption fundamentally flawed. She displayed footage from their tests, showing Sarah Chen's numerous impossible survivals and solutions. The assembly watched in stunned silence as the human repeatedly defied what they had considered immutable laws of nature. Humans don't survive because they're invulnerable, Valtteri explained. They survive because they've evolved to be almost absurdly adaptable. They don't prevent damage. They recover from it. They don't avoid problems. They solve them, usually in ways that shouldn't be possible. A Hyperion delegate raised a glowing appendage. But surely their method of survival is inefficient. The energy cost alone is completely offset by their unprecedented regenerative capabilities and problem-solving abilities. Valtheri interrupted. Consider this. During our crisis, one human with no specialized quantum training prevented a catastrophic core failure using methods that simultaneously saved the station and advanced our understanding of physics by several centuries. She paused, allowing that to sink in. And she did it while making jokes about parallel universe coffee. The council chamber filled with incredulous discussion. Valtheri waited for it to quiet before delivering her final point. But perhaps most importantly, we've discovered that human resilience isn't just physical or psychological. It's fundamental to their entire approach to existence. They don't just survive. They adapt, improvise, and overcome in ways that routinely ignore what we consider possible. She displayed her final data set, a compilation of human achievements that defied conventional understanding. They call it thinking outside the box, though in their case, it's more like they never acknowledged the box existed in the first place. Are you suggesting we revise our entire understanding of survival mechanics? The council chair asked, their multifaceted eyes glowing with concern. I'm suggesting more than that, Valtheri replied. I'm suggesting we revise our understanding of what's possible. Humans have shown us that our carefully constructed limits and laws are more flexible than we imagined. Their greatest strength isn't their durability. It's their absolute refusal to accept any limitation as final. She gestured to where Sarah sat in the observation gallery, currently teaching a group of young aliens how to make paper airplanes out of what appeared to be classified documents. In conclusion, Valtheri said, I propose we establish a new joint research initiative, not to study humans, but to learn from them. Their approach to survival, while chaotic and often terrifying, offers possibilities we never considered. And what of the risks? Someone called out. Their tendency to ignore safety protocols is precisely what makes them invaluable, Valtheri countered. In the past cycle alone, human, unsafe approaches have solved 3 supposedly unsolvable engineering challenges, revolutionized our understanding of quantum mechanics, and somehow made our station's coffee machine achieve consciousness. Though that last one might have been an accident. The council chamber buzzed with excitement and apprehension. As they debated the implications, Valtheri glanced up at Sarah, who gave her a thumbs up while somehow simultaneously rewiring the chamber's environmental controls to create a localized rainbow. The galaxy is changing, Valtheri concluded. We can either adapt with it or watch as humans cheerfully ignore our carefully established impossibilities and reshape reality through sheer determination and what they call spite-powered innovation. As the council voted overwhelmingly to approve her proposal, Valtheri made one final research note. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about humans isn't that they survive without armor. It's that they've turned survival itself into an art form. They don't just endure. They thrive, they create, they revolutionize, and they do it all with a sense of adventure that makes the impossible seem not just possible, but inevitable. She watched as Sarah began explaining to a horrified security team why she thought the chamber's quantum stabilizers would work better if they were a little more chaotic, and added, though perhaps we should establish some basic safety guidelines, just in case their enthusiasm for improvement spreads to our fundamental constants again. The galaxy would never be quite the same, but then again, with humans around, nothing ever stayed the same for long anyway. Would you like me to provide the SEO-optimized title and description for the YouTube video, along with AI image prompts?